The supermarket break room fell silent the moment Sarah Collins was handed her termination letter. Her hands trembled as she stared at the words that would shatter her world. Please, I just needed this job, she thought, but the words stuck in her throat. No one moved. Her supervisor turned her back coldly. The other cashiers avoided her eyes. And the manager simply pointed toward the door she could barely walk through. Her 6-year-old son Ethan was waiting at home, hungry for the dinner she could no longer afford. While she stood there, the weight of that single sheet of paper crushing her spirit. To everyone else in that store, she was just another fired employee who had broken the rules. But earlier that same morning, standing quietly in the checkout line, was a man no one recognized. He wasn't dressed like a boss. He wasn't carrying any identification. And no one had any idea that the quiet stranger she chose to help would turn out to be the millionaire owner of the entire chain. Because within the next few hours, the entire corporate headquarters would be in chaos. And the man in disguise would make sure that this firing became the biggest mistake the company had ever made. But what the supervisor and the manager didn't know at that moment was that the stranger had been watching everything. And the truth about who he really was would change everything. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Let's rewind the clock to the very beginning of that ordinary Tuesday morning in a quiet Midwestern town most Americans have never heard of. Sarah Collins woke up at 5:17 a.m. in the same cramped one-bedroom apartment she had called home for the last 4 years. The alarm on her cracked phone screen was the only sound breaking the silence. She didn't hit snooze. She never did. Because every extra minute in bed meant one less minute she could spend making sure Ethan had what he needed before the school bus came. She slipped out of bed without waking him, padded into the tiny kitchen, and opened the refrigerator. Inside, half a carton of milk, 2 eggs, and a single slice of bread that had seen better days. The rent was due in 3 days. The electric bill was already past due. And Ethan had asked for a birthday cake again last night. She had smiled and said, "We'll get it soon, honey," even though she had no idea how. That smile was her armor. She had learned long ago that if she let the exhaustion show, Ethan would start worrying too. And a 6-year-old shouldn't have to worry about things like eviction notices. Sarah got dressed in the same blue Bennett's grocery polo she had washed the night before. She tied her hair back, splashed cold water on her face, and looked in the mirror for exactly 5 seconds. Just long enough to remind herself she could do this one more day. Then she woke Ethan, helped him into his clothes, packed his lunch with the last apple and a peanut butter sandwich, tied his shoes, kissed his forehead, and walked him to the bus stop in the pouring rain. The bus pulled away. She stood there alone for a moment, rain soaking through her thin jacket, watching the taillights disappear. Then she turned and started the 40-minute walk to the store because the city bus pass had run out 2 days earlier. Little did she know that this particular Tuesday would be the day everything changed. But the change would come in the most unexpected way possible. And it would start with a man who looked like he had nothing left to give. Sarah arrived at Bennett's grocery at 6:45 a.m. The store was already humming with the early shift. She clocked in, grabbed her register drawer, and took her place at checkout lane 3. The first customers were the usual crowd. Retired men grabbing coffee, moms rushing for school snacks, construction workers buying lunch meat. Sarah smiled at every single one, even when her feet already hurt, even when her stomach growled, because she had skipped breakfast to give Ethan the last banana. That smile wasn't fake. It was the only thing she still had control over. Her supervisor, Natalie Gray, watched from the customer service desk. Natalie didn't believe in smiles unless they rang up extra sales. She had made that clear on day 1. You want hours, you earn them, She would snap whenever anyone slowed down. Sarah had heard it 100 times. But this morning felt different. The rain had stopped outside, but the tension inside the store was building like a storm that hadn't broken yet. And then, at 7:22 a.m., he walked in. The stranger. Messy hair, worn-out shoes, faded jacket that had seen too many winters. He moved slowly, like a man who had nowhere to be and no one waiting for him. He picked up a small basket and started down aisle 2. Most employees didn't even glance his way. They had seen his type before. Broke, quiet, probably just killing time. But Sarah noticed. She always noticed the ones who looked like they needed a break. Wait until you hear what happened next, because this ordinary-looking man was about to set off a chain reaction no one in that store could have predicted. The stranger reached the bread section. He stood there staring at the loaves, like he was trying to decide which one he could actually afford. Sarah finished with her customer, glanced at her line, and made a decision. She stepped away from her register for 10 seconds. Just 10 seconds. She walked over, picked up the cheapest loaf, and handed it to him with the same warm smile she gave everyone. "Here," she said softly. "This one's on me today. You look like you could use it." He looked up. Their eyes met. For a split second, something passed between them. Not pity. Not charity. Just simple human kindness. He took the bread. "Thank you," he said. His voice was quiet. Almost too quiet. Then he paid for the few other items in his basket with exact change and left the store without another word. Sarah went back to her register. She thought nothing more of it. She had helped someone. That was all. But what Sarah didn't know was that the stranger had memorized her name tag. And he had already decided that one small act was going to change the entire company. The morning continued. Customers came and went. Sarah rang up groceries, bagged them, smiled through the ache in her back. At 10:15 a.m., the first warning sign appeared. Natalie Gray called her over to the service desk. "Sarah, we need to talk in the office after your shift." That was all she said. No explanation. Just those cold words. Sarah felt her stomach drop. But she kept smiling for the customers. She couldn't afford to let fear show. Because if she lost this job, she lost everything. Ethan's school shoes were already too small. The landlord had already sent the second notice. And there was no backup plan. None. What happened in the next 3 hours would decide whether Sarah Collins walked out of that store with a future or with nothing. But the real story was still hidden. Because the man in the worn shoes wasn't done with Bennett's grocery. Not by a long shot. Lunch break came and went. Sarah ate half a granola bar she had saved from yesterday. She sat in the break room alone, staring at the clock. Her mind kept replaying that morning. The stranger's quiet, "Thank you." She wondered if he had eaten the bread yet. She wondered if anyone else would have done the same thing. Most of the other cashiers wouldn't have. They had learned Natalie's rule the hard way. Kindness didn't pay the bills. At 1:45 p.m., Natalie called her into the manager's office. The door closed behind her with a heavy click. The room smelled like stale coffee and bad decisions. Natalie sat behind the desk. The store manager stood beside her, arms crossed. "Sarah," Natalie began, voice flat, "we've had reports about you giving away product without authorization." Sarah blinked. It was one loaf of bread. The man looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Natalie didn't blink. Policy is policy. You know the rules, no free items, ever. The manager slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. Termination letter. Effective immediately. Sarah's hands started shaking the moment she touched it. She read the words twice. Effective immediately. Final paycheck will be mailed. No severance. Her mind raced. How do I tell Ethan? How do I pay rent? How do I keep the lights on? But she didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of them. She stood up, folded the letter, and walked out without saying another word. The break room was empty when she got there. She sat down on the plastic chair and stared at the paper. It felt heavier than the rent notice. Heavier than the empty fridge. Heavier than every promise she had broken to her son. All she had done was help someone. That was her only mistake. Or so she thought. But here, where the story takes the first real turn. Because while Sarah sat in that break room clutching her termination letter, the man in the worn shoes was already 3 miles away. He had removed the messy wig. He had changed into a tailored suit. And he had walked straight into the corporate headquarters of Bennett's grocery chain. His real name was Alexander Reed, Millionaire CEO, owner of 87 stores across the Midwest. And for the last 6 weeks, he had been conducting a secret undercover operation. He had disguised himself as a broke customer in every single location, testing how his employees treated people who looked like they had nothing. Most stores failed the test. Cashiers ignored him. Managers looked the other way. But Sarah Collins, at store number 17, she had passed with flying colors. And that single act of kindness had just exposed a management problem that ran all the way to the top. Wait until you hear what Alexander Reed did next. Because he didn't just note her name. He pulled the security footage. He reviewed every camera angle from that morning. He watched Sarah's smile. He watched Natalie's cold stare. He watched the exact moment the termination letter was printed. And then he made a decision that would shake the entire company to its foundation. But Sarah knew none of this. She had already left the store. She walked home in the same rain that had started again. The letter in her pocket felt like it was burning a hole through her jacket. She stopped at the corner store and bought a small pack of ramen with the last $7 in her purse. Ethan would have something to eat tonight. She would skip dinner. Again. When she got home, Ethan ran to her with the biggest smile. "Mommy, did you bring the cake?" She knelt down, hugged him tight, and whispered the words she had practiced the whole way home. "Not today, baby, but soon, I promise." Then she sent him to play with his one-toy truck while she sat at the kitchen table and stared at the termination letter until the words blurred. That night at 8:47 p.m., a black luxury car pulled up outside her apartment building. Sarah heard the engine. She looked out the window. A man stepped out. Same height. Same build. But now he was wearing a suit that cost more than her yearly rent. He carried a thick envelope. He walked straight to her door and knocked. Sarah froze. Who could it be at this hour? She opened the door slowly. The man looked at her. The same eyes from the bread aisle. But now they were clear. Confident. And he spoke the words that would rewrite her entire life. "Sarah Collins." She nodded, speechless. "My name is Alexander Reed. I own Bennett's grocery." He paused. "I was the man you helped this morning." Sarah's knees almost gave out. He continued. "I've been testing my stores for weeks, disguised, watching how people treat customers who look like they have nothing. Most of my managers failed that test. Your supervisor failed it spectacularly. But you passed." He handed her the envelope. "Inside is your old job back, plus a promotion to assistant manager, full benefits, and a year's rent paid in advance. There's also a college fund started for Ethan, $10,000 to begin with. It will grow." Sarah couldn't speak. Tears she had held back all day finally came. But Alexander wasn't finished. He leaned in slightly. "And one more thing. Natalie Gray no longer works for this company, effective immediately, because the real mistake wasn't yours. It was the culture that punished kindness." He turned to leave, then stopped. "One last question, Sarah. Would you have helped me even if you knew I was the owner?" She looked him straight in the eye. Yes, because you still looked like you needed it. Alexander Reed smiled for the first time all day. That's exactly why you're the future of this company. He got back in the black car and drove away. Sarah stood in her doorway, holding the envelope like it was made of gold. The weight that had crushed her earlier was gone, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. But the story doesn't end there. Because what happened next inside the corporate offices would shock even the board of directors. Alexander Reed called an emergency meeting at 10:30 p.m. that same night. He played the security footage for every regional manager. He showed them Sarah's act of kindness. He showed them Natalie's cold response. Then he laid down a new company-wide policy. From that moment forward, every employee would be trained on one simple rule. Kindness is not a weakness. It is the ultimate competitive advantage. Stores that scored high on the Reed test would receive bonuses. Managers who failed would be replaced. And Sarah Collins became the living example used in every training video from that day on. But here's the part most people never hear. Alexander Reed didn't stop with one store. He spent the next 18 months quietly visiting every Bennett's location in disguise. He fired 17 managers. He promoted 43 cashiers who showed the same kindness Sarah had. The company's customer satisfaction scores jumped 38%. Profits rose. And the story of the single mom who got fired for helping a stranger quietly became corporate legend. Sarah herself never sought the spotlight. She simply went back to work the next day. Promoted. Rent paid. Ethan got his birthday cake that weekend. A big one, with extra frosting. And every time a customer came through her new express lane looking tired or broke, Sarah remembered that morning. She remembered the stranger in the worn shoes. And she helped. Every single time. Because she now knew the truth. Sometimes the person you think has nothing actually has everything to give back. And sometimes the biggest mistake a company can make is punishing the very people who care the most. Years later, when Ethan was old enough to understand, Sarah told him the whole story. He asked her one question. "Mom, would you do it again?" She smiled the same smile that started everything. Every single day. And that, gentlemen, is how one loaf of bread, one act of kindness, and one millionaire in disguise proved that doing the right thing still matters in this world. Even when the system tries to tell you otherwise. What would you have done if you were Sarah that morning? Would you have helped the stranger? Or would you have played it safe like everyone else? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story hit you the way it hit me, make sure you're subscribed. Because the next one is even wilder. You won't want to miss it.